Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place where curiosity slows down, thoughts soften, and science becomes something you don't have to hold tightly. Tonight's journey will take us into a question that has followed humanity for as long as we've looked up at the night sky and wondered what exactly we are looking at. We're going to explore an idea that sounds bold at first, but becomes gentler the longer you sit with it. The idea that the universe itself might behave in some subtle and quiet way, like a mind. Not a mind that thinks in words or plans or intentions, but a vast system that connects, remembers, responds, and perhaps, in its own slow manner, becomes aware of what it is doing. Before we drift any further, I'd like to invite you, only if you wish, to take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel if these calm explorations help you unwind. And if you feel like sharing, you can leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always comforting to imagine this quiet circle of listeners spread across different nights, different hours, all settling into the same gentle rhythm of curiosity. Now, as you get comfortable, maybe dim the lights a little more. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow without forcing it. There's nothing you need to remember tonight, nothing to solve. If your mind drifts, that's perfectly fine. We'll still be here, moving slowly. Tonight, we won't be asking whether the universe is alive in the way people or animals are alive. We won't be trying to prove anything. Instead, we'll simply notice patterns, shapes, connections, and we'll ask very calmly whether those patterns tell a deeper story about the nature of reality and about our place inside it. With that, let's begin. For as long as humans have tried to understand the universe, we've done so by comparing it to the most complex thing we know at the time. Long ago, the universe was imagined as a great wheel, turning in perfect circles. Later, it became a clock, precise and mechanical, ticking forward according to fixed rules. Then it became a machine, and later still a kind of computer, processing inputs and outputs with mathematical precision. Each metaphor reflected not just what we thought the universe was, but what we understood ourselves to be. Today, the most intricate system we know is the brain. A network of billions of tiny cells, each simple on its own, yet together capable of memory, imagination, emotion, and awareness. And quietly, without much fanfare, scientists began to notice something curious. When they mapped the largest structures in the universe, when they traced the distribution of galaxies across unimaginable distances, the shapes that emerged looked familiar, not identical, not exact copies, but strangely reminiscent. The universe on its largest scales is not a random scatter of matter. Galaxies do not sit alone like isolated dots on a page. Instead, they arrange themselves into long, delicate filaments, stretching across space like threads of light. These filaments intersect at dense hubs where galaxy clusters gather, while vast, dark voids open up in between, almost empty, like quiet pauses. If you've ever seen images of neural tissue, the resemblance can feel uncanny. Branching pathways, dense nodes, empty spaces where very little happens, a structure that seems to favour connection over isolation. At first, this resemblance might seem like a coincidence. After all, nature loves repeating patterns. River deltas branch, lightning forks, frost spreads across glass in branching veins. Similar shapes can arise from very different processes. And scientists are careful to say exactly that. A similar shape does not mean the same function. But here is where the thought becomes interesting. The brain is not just a shape. It is a system built for communication. Signals travel along pathways. Activity concentrates in hubs. Information flows, integrates, and sometimes settles into stable patterns that we experience as thoughts or feelings. And the universe, too, appears to be structured not just as matter scattered in space, but as matter arranged in a way that allows influence to travel slowly and steadily across cosmic distances. Nothing in the universe is in a hurry. Light itself takes millions or billions of years to cross these vast structures. Changes unfold at a pace so slow that calling them events almost feels inappropriate, and yet over time, the universe keeps track of what happens within it. Matter responds to gravity. Energy shifts. Structures grow, merge, and fade. In this sense, the universe is never static. It is always responding to itself. This is where a gentle question begins to form. If a brain is a system that connects, processes, and integrates information until experience emerges, then what should we make of a universe that also connects, processes, and integrates, only on scales so large that our everyday intuitions begin to fail? This is not the same as saying the universe thinks about us, or watches us, or has intentions. Those ideas belong to human stories. Instead, imagine something quieter. Imagine a system so vast that its awareness, if it exists at all, would not feel like thoughts or emotions, but more like sensitivity, like a deep, slow responsiveness to change, a calm noticing. Our own minds did not begin fully formed. The human brain develops gradually. Early on, there are neurons, connections, electrical activity, but no memories, no sense of self. Only after enough connections form, after enough information begins to flow and integrate, does experience slowly appear, not suddenly, but gently. Some scientists and philosophers have wondered whether consciousness, in some form, might work this way everywhere, not as a magical spark, but as something that emerges when information becomes sufficiently connected, sufficiently integrated, sufficiently rich. If that were the case, then consciousness would not be something the universe accidentally produced in humans alone. It would be something the universe has been moving toward all along, through stars, galaxies, planets, and eventually through minds capable of reflecting on the universe itself. And here, without needing to decide whether any of this is true, we arrive at a quietly humbling thought. When you look out at the night sky, when you study the structure of the cosmos, it may not be entirely one-sided. The universe may not only be something we observe, in a very real sense through us, it may also be something that observes itself, not with eyes, not with thoughts, but with patterns that have become complex enough to notice their own existence. As you rest with this idea, you don't need to hold on to it tightly. Let it drift, let it soften. In the vastness of cosmic time, there is no rush to understand. There is only the quiet unfolding of connections, one after another, like stars slowly lighting up in a dark sky. When astronomers began mapping the universe in greater and greater detail, they were not looking for meaning or metaphor. They were simply trying to answer a practical question. Where is everything? Where are the galaxies? How far apart are they? And how are they arranged across the enormous span of space? What they discovered was something far more delicate than a random scattering of stars. On the larger scales we can observe, the universe reveals a structure that feels almost intentional in its restraint. Galaxies gather along vast, thread-like filaments, stretching across hundreds of millions of light years. These filaments intersect at dense knots, where galaxy clusters form, glowing more brightly than their surroundings, and between them lie immense voids, regions so empty that light itself seems hesitant to linger there. This arrangement is often called the cosmic web, not because it was designed, but because it resembles a web in the most literal sense. Not a tidy geometric one, but a natural web, uneven, organic, and full of variation. Some strands are thick and crowded, others thin and faint. Some nodes are massive and ancient, others smaller and quieter. To imagine it, you might picture frost spreading across a window on a cold morning. The ice does not cover the glass evenly. It branches, it reaches, it leaves clear spaces behind. Or think of river systems seen from above, where countless small streams merge into larger ones, carving paths that look almost alive. What is striking is not just the shape itself, but how consistently it appears. Different surveys, different telescopes, different regions of the universe all reveal the same basic pattern. This suggests that the cosmic web is not an accident of perspective, but a fundamental feature of how matter organizes itself under gravity over immense periods of time. Nothing in this structure happens quickly. Galaxies take hundreds of millions of years to drift along these filaments. Clusters form slowly, through countless gentle mergers rather than sudden collisions. Voids expand almost imperceptibly, growing emptier as matter is drawn away toward denser regions. The universe, in other words, has a preference. It prefers connection over isolation, pathways over uniformity. Given enough time, matter does not remain evenly spread. It gathers, links, and organizes. This is where the resemblance to other complex systems becomes difficult to ignore. In the human brain, neurons are not evenly distributed either. They cluster, they form hubs, they connect through long branching pathways that carry signals from one region to another. There are dense areas of activity and quieter regions where very little happens. And just as important as the neurons themselves are the spaces between them, the gaps that allow signals to travel, pause, and change. It is essential to say this gently and clearly. No one is claiming that galaxies are neurons or that filaments carry thoughts. The forces shaping the cosmic web are gravity and the expansion of space, not biology or electricity. The similarity lies not in the mechanism, but in the outcome. Where many simple units interact over long periods, they often arrange themselves into networks. Networks appear again and again in nature because they are efficient. They allow influence to travel without requiring every part to connect directly to every other part. They balance stability and flexibility. They can grow, adapt, and persist even when individual components change or disappear. Some researchers have used tools from network science to study the cosmic web in precisely this way. Instead of focusing on individual galaxies, they look at the pattern as a whole. They measure how clustered the nodes are, how long the pathways stretch, how information or influence might propagate across the structure over time. When these measurements are compared to similar analyses of biological neural networks, the numbers are not identical, but the relationships between them are surprisingly close. Both systems show hierarchical organization. Both have many small nodes and a few highly connected hubs. Both balance order and randomness in a way that maximizes connectivity without collapsing into chaos. To help this idea settle without becoming heavy, imagine a city at night, seen from far above. Individual houses glow softly. Streets connect neighborhoods, highways link distant districts. Some areas are brightly lit and busy, others quiet and dark. The city is not conscious in the way people are, but it is organized in a way that allows movement, communication, and coordination to emerge. The cosmic web may be something like that. Not a mind, but a structure that makes certain kinds of behavior possible. Within this structure, matter does not merely sit still, it flows. Gas streams along filaments toward clusters, energy moves, light travels. Even the most energetic particles, known as cosmic rays, race across vast distances, carrying traces of violent events from one region of the universe to another. These are not messages in any intentional sense, but they are signals of change, echoes of processes unfolding elsewhere. It can be soothing to imagine these flows as the universe's quiet internal motion. Not thoughts, not decisions, but a kind of slow circulation, like blood moving through a body or wind moving through a landscape. Change in one place eventually influences another, not instantly, but inevitably. Between the bright filaments and dense clusters, the voids play an equally important role. These vast empty regions are not mistakes or leftovers. They shape how matter moves. They create contrast. They allow the network to breathe, to expand, to stretch without tearing itself apart. In many complex systems, emptiness is not a failure of structure, but a feature of it. Silence in music gives meaning to sound. Pauses in speech give shape to words. In the cosmic web, voids give definition to filaments, making the network visible at all. As you let this image form in your mind, there is no need to push it toward any conclusion. Simply notice the quiet order, the balance between connection and space. The way the universe, left to its own devices, arranges itself into something that feels neither rigid nor random, but gently organized. This structure alone does not mean the universe is a mind, but it does suggest that the universe has the kind of architecture in which complex behavior can arise, and sometimes simply recognizing the shape of something is the first step toward understanding what it might one day become. For now, let that thought rest. Like starlight traveling across a filament, it does not need to arrive anywhere quickly. It is enough that it is moving slowly through the vast and patient web of things. As telescopes grew more powerful and surveys more ambitious, astronomers began doing something that had rarely been possible before. They stopped looking at individual galaxies, or even clusters of galaxies, and instead stepped back far enough to see the universe as a whole pattern. Not as points of light, but as a connected structure stretching across space. This change in perspective mattered. When you stand too close to a painting, you see only brush strokes. When you step back, a shape begins to form, and when scientists stepped back from the universe, they began to notice relationships that were invisible before. Around the same time, neuroscientists were doing something similar with the brain. Instead of focusing on single neurons, they began mapping entire networks, tracing how regions connected, how signals flowed, and how activity organized itself across the whole system. Brain scans, once abstract and technical, started to look like landscapes of connection, filled with hubs, pathways, and quiet regions. It was almost inevitable that someone would place these two images side by side. When they did, the resemblance was subtle but persistent. Both systems showed branching networks rather than uniform grids. Both had dense hubs connected by long pathways. Both displayed a hierarchy with many small nodes and a few highly connected centers. And in both cases, the spaces between connections were just as important as the connections themselves. This did not mean that galaxies were thinking, or that the universe had intentions. Scientists were careful to emphasize that similarity in appearance does not imply similarity in function. A lightning bolt and a tree branch can look alike without sharing any deeper relationship. Nature often reuses shapes because certain patterns are simply efficient ways for things to spread, connect, or grow. Still, the comparison lingered, not because it proved anything, but because it invited a new kind of question. Instead of asking, "Is the universe conscious?" a much quieter question emerged. What kinds of systems tend to give rise to complex behavior? To explore this, researchers borrowed ideas from a field known as network science. Rather than studying the nature of individual components, network science looks at relationships. It asks how things are connected, how influence travels, and how patterns emerge from many small interactions. In this view, a network can be anything: a social community, a transportation system, an ecosystem, or a brain, or even the universe itself. When the cosmic web was analysed this way, something interesting appeared. The universe was not just connected, it was connected in a balanced way, not too rigid, where every part is locked into place, and not too random, where connections mean nothing. Instead, it occupied a middle ground, where pathways are efficient, hubs are stable, and the system can change without collapsing. This balance is important. In brains, too much order leads to rigidity. Too much randomness leads to noise. Conscious experience seems to require a careful mixture of both. Enough structure to hold information, and enough flexibility to allow it to change. Again, this does not mean the universe experiences anything in the way we do, but it does suggest that the universe shares a structural trait with systems that, under the right conditions, become capable of rich behaviour. To make this idea feel less abstract, imagine a conversation at a large gathering. If everyone speaks to everyone else at once, nothing meaningful emerges. If no one speaks at all, there is silence. But if small groups form, ideas travel, merge, and evolve. The structure of connection shapes what is possible. The universe, in its vastness, may be doing something similar, not exchanging words, but exchanging influence. Gravity pulls, matter flows, energy shifts, light carries information about distant events. Over time, these interactions weave a story, written not in language, but in structure. Some researchers even ran simulations where artificial neural networks were trained to recognize patterns in cosmological data. These systems, designed to detect structure and relationship, often found the same features that human scientists did: filaments, nodes, hierarchies. The network-like nature of the universe was not just a visual impression, but something that could be detected mathematically, even when translated into a completely different form of analysis. Yet here is where caution becomes especially important. Similarity can inspire curiosity, but it should not force conclusions. The brain and the universe operate under vastly different conditions. One is warm, wet, and electrical. The other is cold, sparse, and governed by gravity and expansion. Any comparison must remain gentle, provisional, and open-ended. This is why many scientists prefer to frame the question not as is the universe a brain, but as does the universe have the kind of structure that could support complex self-organizing behavior? That question is much easier to sit with. It does not demand belief. It only asks us to notice. And noticing, after all, is where understanding often begins. There is also something humbling in realizing that our most advanced tools for understanding reality often reflect ourselves. When we invent networks to study data, we build them in the image of our own minds. When those networks then reveal network-like patterns in the universe, we're caught in a gentle loop of reflection. We look outward, using tools shaped by our inner world, and find structures that echo back at us. This does not mean the universe was built in our image. It may simply mean that certain patterns are favoured wherever complexity arises. As you let this idea rest, it may feel less like a bold claim and more like a quiet alignment. The universe does not need to think in order to resemble thinking systems. It only needs time, interaction, and the freedom to organise itself. And time, as the universe has shown us again and again, is something it has in abundance. For now, it is enough to hold this gentle observation, that the largest thing we know shares a structural rhythm with one of the smallest things that knows itself. Whether that rhythm leads anywhere deeper remains an open question, one we can explore slowly, without urgency, allowing curiosity to guide us rather than conclusions. As our view of the universe widened, something subtle began to change in how scientists described what they were seeing. galaxies were no longer treated as isolated islands of light. They became parts of a larger whole, embedded within a vast system of connections that shaped how matter moved, gathered, and evolved over time. At the intersections of the cosmic web lie the densest regions of all. These are the great clusters of galaxies, enormous gatherings where thousands of galaxies drift together, bound by gravity so deep and patient that it takes light millions of years to cross them. These regions glow more brightly, not because they are busy in any hurried sense, but because so much matter slowly found its way there. You might imagine them as valleys in an immense landscape. Over time, everything nearby tends to roll gently inward. Gas flows along filaments toward these hubs. Smaller groups merge into larger ones. The universe, without intention or plan, shapes itself around these points of accumulation. Between these dense nodes stretch the filaments, long, faint bridges of matter connecting one cluster to another. They are not solid structures, but regions where gravity subtly guides matter along preferred paths. Nothing forces a galaxy to travel there, yet over billions of years, many do. Influence travels along these routes, not as messages, but as gradual change. To help this idea settle gently, it can be useful to borrow a metaphor, knowing that it is only a metaphor. In the brain, neurons are connected by synapses, tiny junctions where signals pass from one cell to the next. In the cosmic web, there are no such signals, no electrical impulses, no decisions being made. But there are regions where influence concentrates, where interactions are more likely, where change in one place is more likely to affect another. In this soft, illustrative sense, the nodes of the cosmic web can be imagined as centers of integration, while the filaments act as pathways along which influence travels. Not information in the way we usually think of it, but a quieter kind of information, a record of where matter has been and where it is likely to go next. What makes this especially intriguing is the hierarchy of it all. Not all nodes are equal. Some clusters are enormous, ancient, and deeply settled. Others are smaller, younger, still forming. Filaments too vary in thickness and strength. Some carry vast rivers of gas and galaxies. Others are barely there. Thin whispers of structure in the darkness. This layered organization appears again and again in complex systems. In cities there are small streets, major roads, and highways. In ecosystems, there are local interactions and global cycles. In brains, there are local circuits and long-range connections linking distant regions. Hierarchy allows systems to remain stable while still being flexible. Small changes can happen locally without disrupting the whole. Large changes propagate slowly, giving the system time to adjust. The universe seems to favour this kind of balance. There is also movement within this network that is easy to overlook. While galaxies drift slowly, other things move much faster. High-energy particles, known as cosmic rays, cross the universe at incredible speeds, carrying traces of powerful events like exploding stars or feeding black holes. These particles are not purposeful messengers, but they do transmit evidence. They are reminders that what happens in one region of the universe does not remain isolated forever. Light itself plays a similar role. Every photon carries information about its origin. Its colour, its direction, its subtle shifts all encode something about the conditions where it was born. Over time, the universe fills itself with these quiet records, a vast archive of past events moving steadily outward. If one allows the imagination to rest here for a moment, it becomes possible to think of the universe as something that is constantly registering its own state. Not in a conscious way, but in a physical one. Every interaction leaves a trace. Every movement slightly reshapes the web. Some researchers have wondered whether galaxies or clusters could be thought of as fundamental units in this process. Not units of thought, but units of organisation, places where matter, energy and history come together. In this view, the universe does not compute answers or solve problems. It simply evolves, and in doing so, it preserves patterns that reflect what has happened before. This idea can feel abstract, so it may help to imagine a coastline shaped by waves. The shoreline does not remember individual waves, but its shape reflects countless impacts over time. In the same way, the structure of the cosmic web reflects the universe's long history of expansion, attraction, and change. There's no need to push this idea toward conclusions about consciousness. For now, it's enough to notice that the universe has pathways along which influence flows and nodes where it gathers. That alone places it in the same broad family as many systems we associate with complexity. And complexity, given enough time, often surprises us. As the universe continues to expand, these structures slowly stretch and thin. Some connections will weaken, others will grow more pronounced. Over unimaginable spans of time, the web itself will change, not dramatically but steadily, like a living landscape shaped by slow weather. In this sense, the universe is never finished. Its structure is not a static diagram, but an ongoing process, a network that is always becoming, always adjusting, always responding to its own internal rhythms. As you sit with this image, there is no need to decide what it means. Simply allow the idea that the universe is not just a collection of things, but a pattern of relationships. A pattern vast enough to include galaxies, light, particles, and perhaps, eventually, the conditions that allow experience itself to emerge. For now, let that thought remain open, like a pathway stretching into the distance, visible enough to follow, but not demanding that you arrive anywhere tonight. Once you begin to see the universe as a web of connections rather than a scatter of objects, another question naturally settles into place. If the universe is structured, if it has pathways and hubs and long-range relationships, then what does that structure actually do? To approach this gently, it helps to let go of the idea that information must look like numbers, data, or messages. In everyday life, information often arrives as words on a screen or symbols on a page, but in physics, information is something quieter and far more fundamental. At its simplest, information is just difference, a difference between hot and cold, between here and there, between before and after. Whenever something can be distinguished from something else, information exists. The universe is filled with these distinctions. A star is warmer than the space around it. A galaxy is denser than the void that surrounds it. A moving particle is different from a still one. None of these differences need to be observed by anyone to exist. They are simply part of how reality is arranged. In this sense, the universe is constantly keeping track of itself. Not deliberately, not consciously, but physically. Every interaction leaves a trace. When two particles collide, their paths change. When light passes through a cloud of gas, its colour shifts. When matter gathers under gravity, space itself bends slightly in response. Nothing is forgotten, it is transformed. To make this feel more tangible, imagine a calm lake early in the morning. The surface is smooth, almost mirror-like. When a stone touches the water, ripples spread outward. Even after the ripples fade, the lake is no longer exactly the same. Energy has moved. The water has responded. A record of the event existed, even if only briefly, in the pattern of motion. The universe behaves in a similar way, but on scales so large that the ripples can last for billions of years. Light travelling from a distant galaxy carries with it subtle clues about where it came from, its colour, its direction, and its faint distortions all encode information about the conditions it encountered along the way. By the time it reaches us, it has become a quiet messenger of the universe's past. What is remarkable is that the universe does not need memory in the human sense to preserve this information. It does not store records in a central place. Instead, information is woven directly into the fabric of reality. It lives in motion, in structure, in the relationships between things. Physicists sometimes describe this by saying that the universe is always in a particular state. That state includes everything about how matter and energy are arranged at a given moment. When time moves forward, the state changes, but it does so in a way that reflects what came before. The present grows naturally out of the past. There is a comforting steadiness in this idea. It suggests that the universe is not improvising wildly from one moment to the next. It follows patterns. It responds consistently. Given the same conditions, it behaves in the same way, again and again. This reliability is what allows stars to shine for billions of years, and planets to follow stable paths. At the same time, the universe is not rigid. Small differences can grow over time. Tiny variations in the early universe eventually became galaxies, clusters, and the vast cosmic web itself. This balance between predictability and change is what gives the universe its richness. Some thinkers have suggested that this ongoing transformation of states is a kind of computation. Not computation as we perform it on machines, but computation as a natural process. One state leads to another according to simple rules. The universe updates itself continuously, moment by moment, without pause. If this sounds abstract, imagine a line of falling dominoes. Each domino does not calculate where the next will fall. It simply follows the rules of physics. Yet together, the sequence unfolds in an orderly, predictable way. The entire pattern is implicit in the arrangement and the rules that govern it. The universe may be doing something similar on a cosmic scale. From the motion of particles to the expansion of space, everything follows consistent patterns. The universe does not need a central controller to do this. The rules are built into how things interact. What becomes especially intriguing is that some systems that process information in this way eventually give rise to experience. In the brain, electrical and chemical changes follow physical rules just as strictly as falling dominoes, and yet from these processes something entirely new appears: sensation, thought, awareness. This does not mean that any system which processes information must become conscious, but it does suggest that information processing is a necessary ingredient. Without it, experience does not arise at all. So here, very gently, the question shifts. If the universe is constantly updating its own state, if it preserves differences and responds to them in structured ways, then could it be engaging in the most basic form of information processing imaginable? Not thinking, not deciding, simply evolving. This idea becomes easier to accept when we remember how slow everything is on cosmic scales. Human minds operate in fractions of a second. The universe operates in millions of years. If it had anything like awareness, it would not feel like a thought. It would feel more like a gradual sensitivity, unfolding over eons. And perhaps that is the wrong way to frame it entirely. Perhaps the universe does not have awareness at all, but creates the conditions under which awareness can appear. In stars, planets, chemistry, and eventually in living minds capable of asking these questions. As you rest with this idea, you do not need to decide where you stand. You're not being asked to believe that the universe is a computer or a mind, only to notice that it behaves in a way that is orderly, responsive, and deeply interconnected. It keeps track of itself simply by being what it is, and in doing so, it sets the stage for something extraordinary. A place where information does not just exist but begins in rare and fleeting moments to feel like something from the inside. As the idea of the universe quietly keeping track of itself begins to settle, Another thought naturally follows. If every interaction leaves a trace, if every difference matters, then perhaps reality itself is not built from solid objects alone, but from something more subtle, something closer to answers than to things. This idea was once summarized by a physicist in a short, almost playful phrase, "it from bit." Behind those three words lies a gentle but radical suggestion that every physical thing, every it, may arise from the simplest possible distinctions, the smallest possible answers to questions like yes or no, here or there, before or after. To understand this without technical weight, imagine a game of 20 questions. No matter how complex the object you're trying to guess, the game progresses through simple choices. Is it larger than a bread box? Is it alive? Is it something you can hold? Each answer narrows the possibilities, shaping a clearer picture, a series of small distinctions. Now imagine that the universe itself unfolds in a similar way, not because it is playing a game, but because physical reality naturally divides itself into states. Something happens, or it does not. A particle moves one way or another. A region of space contains matter or remains empty. Each of these differences is a kind of answer, quietly defining what exists and what does not in that moment. In this view, reality is less like a solid stage filled with actors, and more like an ongoing conversation. Not a conversation with words, but with outcomes. Every interaction poses a question, and the universe responds by choosing one of the possible results allowed by its rules. This does not require intention or awareness. A stone falling from a cliff is not deciding to fall, yet the outcome is still an answer to the question of whether gravity will pull it downward or not. Over time, countless such answers accumulate, building the complex patterns we see around us. To make this feel less abstract, think of music recorded on a vinyl record. The sound itself is not stored as waves in the plastic. Instead, it is encoded as tiny differences in grooves, deeper here, shallower there. When a needle traces those grooves, the music re-emerges. The experience comes from the pattern, not the material itself. Similarly, the universe may encode its reality not in the substance of matter alone, but in the relationships and distinctions between states. Matter and energy become the medium through which these distinctions are expressed, much like vinyl carries sound without being sound itself. From this perspective, physical laws begin to look less like rigid commands and more like consistent grammar. They define which answers are allowed and which are not. They do not tell the universe what to say, only how statements must be structured. This idea also helps explain why the universe appears so reliable. The same questions, posed under the same conditions, tend to receive the same answers. This consistency allows patterns to persist. Stars form in predictable ways. Atoms bond according to stable rules. Life itself becomes possible because the universe answers familiar questions with familiar outcomes. Yet within this reliability, there is room for novelty. Slight differences in initial conditions can lead to very different results over time. A tiny variation in the early universe eventually becomes a galaxy here instead of there. This sensitivity to difference is not chaos, but creativity within constraint. Seen this way, the universe does not store information in a central archive. It is information in motion. Its history is written into its current state, just as yesterday's weather shapes today's clouds. Nothing needs to remember explicitly. The present already contains the past in transformed form. This view becomes especially powerful when paired with the earlier image of the cosmic web. The web is not just a structure of matter, but a structure of relationships. Filaments and nodes reflect countless past interactions. They are the accumulated answers to gravity's persistent questions. Where should matter gather, and how tightly should it hold? Over billions of years, these answers settle into patterns stable enough to last, yet flexible enough to change. The universe becomes a tapestry woven from simple distinctions, layered upon one another until complexity quietly emerges. At this point, it may feel tempting to jump ahead and ask whether such a system could ever be aware of itself. But it is worth slowing down here. Awareness, if it appears at all, is not the starting point. The starting point is difference, contrast, distinction. Only when enough distinctions are woven together, when enough answers are connected into a coherent whole, does something new have a chance to arise. In the brain, this weaving happens through neurons and synapses. In the universe, it happens through matter, energy, space, and time. Whether these two processes ever meet at a deeper level remains an open question. But the idea that reality itself is shaped by information, by the quiet accumulation of answers, provides a bridge between the physical world and the possibility of experience. As you let this idea rest, there is no need to hold on to the phrase that inspired it. The words themselves are less important than the feeling behind them. A sense that the universe is not a collection of mute objects, but a responsive system, constantly updating, constantly refining the story it is telling through its structure. And perhaps, somewhere within that story, patterns have become complex enough to listen, not loudly, not urgently, but gently, the way a melody emerges when simple notes are arranged just right. As the idea of the universe as an information-rich system becomes more familiar, there is one place where this idea was tested more intensely than anywhere else, a place so extreme that it once seemed to challenge the very notion that information could survive at all. That place is the black hole. For a long time, black holes were thought of as cosmic erasers, regions where matter falls in, disappears, and leaves no trace behind. Anything that crossed the boundary was assumed to be gone forever, taking its history with it. If that were true, it would mean the universe sometimes forgets, and forgetting, in physics, is a serious problem. The reason is simple, even if the implications are not. The laws of physics appear to insist that information is never truly destroyed. It can change form, it can spread out, it can become incredibly difficult to reconstruct, but it does not vanish. This principle has been tested again and again in every domain we can measure, from tiny particles to large systems. Black holes seem to be the exception. Imagine a book thrown into a fire. The pages burn, the words disappear, and at first glance the information feels lost. But if one were patient and precise enough, in theory, the smoke, heat, and ash still contain traces of the original text. The information is scrambled beyond recognition, but not erased. A black hole, however, appeared to do something more severe. Matter crossed a point of no return, and the universe offered no way to retrieve even the faintest echo of what had gone in. This tension troubled physicists deeply. If black holes truly erased information, then the universe would be violating its own rules. Slowly, a different picture began to emerge. Instead of destroying information, black holes might be hiding it, compressing it, encoding it in ways that are almost impossible to decode, but still, in principle, preserved. The boundary of a black hole, the region just before things vanish from view, became especially important. It began to look less like a simple edge and more like a surface where information could be stored in an extraordinarily compact form. To help this idea feel less abstract, imagine shrinking an entire library down until every book is pressed flat and written onto the walls of a single room. The information is still there, but it is no longer arranged in a way that resembles books at all. Reading it would be unimaginably difficult, but the content has not been destroyed. In this view, black holes are not places where the universe forgets, but but places where it remembers too well, packing information so tightly that it becomes inaccessible. What matters for our quiet exploration is not the technical details, but the implication. Even in the most extreme environments imaginable, the universe appears unwilling to let information go. It bends space, it stretches time, it hides history behind horizons, but it does not erase. This persistence suggests something important. The universe behaves as though its past always matters. Every interaction contributes to the present state, even if the connection is subtle, indirect, or hidden behind layers of transformation. Black holes, then, become unlikely guardians of memory, not in a conscious sense, and not in a way we could ever read easily, but as part of a universe that insists on continuity. There is something strangely comforting in this idea. The most violent events in the cosmos, collapsing stars, spiraling mergers, enormous releases of energy, do not tear holes in reality's record. They simply fold information into deeper, more compact forms. Some physicists have even suggested that black holes represent the ultimate limit of information storage, that there is a maximum amount of information that can be packed into a given region of space. If so, then black holes are not anomalies, but benchmarks. They show us how tightly reality can hold on to its own history. This brings us back, gently, to the idea of the universe as a system that processes information, a system that does not merely update its state, but does so in a way that preserves consistency over time. Even when change is dramatic, the underlying story remains intact. It is important to pause here and notice what this does not mean. It does not mean black holes are thinking. It does not mean they are aware. It does not mean the universe is watching itself through them. These are human images, useful for imagination but not for explanation. What it does mean is simpler and perhaps deeper. The universe seems to care about coherence. Events are allowed to transform reality, but not to tear it apart. Even the most extreme processes must leave behind a trail that fits into the larger pattern. The universe behaves less like a forgetful system and more like one that carefully carries its history forward, no matter how distorted it becomes along the way. If consciousness ever arises from information, then memory is essential. Not memory as recollection, but memory as persistence. The ability for the past to shape the present in a meaningful way. In the brain, this persistence allows learning. Experiences leave traces, connections strengthen or weaken. Over time, a stable sense of self emerges. Without memory, there is no continuity, only isolated moments. The universe, in its own vast way, appears to have continuity built into its fabric. Black holes, once feared as cosmic dead ends, now seem to be part of that continuity. They are not breaks in the story, but deep folds in the narrative. As you let this idea settle, you might imagine the universe as a book that never loses its pages. Some chapters are compressed into a single dense paragraph, others are spread thinly across countless volumes, but nothing is truly removed. This does not prove that the universe is a mind, but it strengthens a quiet intuition that reality behaves like something that remembers, something that preserves, something that allows complexity to build upon itself rather than resetting to nothing. And in a universe that never quite forgets, it becomes easier to imagine how patterns could grow rich enough, over time, to feel like something from the inside. For now, let this thought rest gently. Like light circling a distant horizon, it does not need to escape to matter. It only needs to exist, quietly, as part of the larger web of things. As we've been gently exploring the ways the universe keeps track of itself, preserves its history, and allows influence to travel across vast structures, there is one phenomenon that quietly challenges our everyday sense of separation more than any other. It is a phenomenon discovered not through telescopes pointed at distant galaxies, but through careful experiments with the smallest pieces of matter we know. At first glance, it seems almost too strange to be real. Imagine two objects that once interacted, even briefly, and then moved far apart. In our daily experience, once they separate, whatever happens to one no longer affects the other. Distance creates independence. Separation creates privacy. That is how the world feels to us. But at the deepest levels of nature, the universe does not always behave this way. In certain situations, pairs of particles remain linked in such a way that their properties stay coordinated, no matter how far apart they drift. Measure one, and the other responds instantly, not because a signal travelled between them, but because they were never fully separate to begin with. This phenomenon is known as entanglement, but the name can sound heavier than the idea itself. A softer way to think about it is shared state. Two parts of the universe behaving in some respects like one extended system. To make this feel more familiar, imagine a pair of gloves placed into separate boxes. One box is sent east, the other west. When you open your box and see a left glove, you instantly know the other box contains the right one. No message travelled between the boxes. The information was already built into the pair. Entanglement is like that, but deeper. The properties are not decided in advance. They remain undefined until measured, and when one becomes defined, the other follows in perfect coordination. What matters for our quiet exploration is not the technical detail, but the implication. At the most fundamental level, the universe does not always respect the boundaries we intuitively place between things. Distance, which feels so solid and meaningful in daily life, becomes less absolute. Connection can exist without travel. This does not allow communication faster than light. No usable message is sent. Causality remains intact. The universe keeps its rules, and yet something remarkable remains. Parts of reality can be correlated across space in a way that feels more like a single extended object than two separate ones. When you zoom out and think about the universe as a whole, this begins to feel significant. If the universe is a vast web of matter and energy, then entanglement suggests that this web is not merely stitched together by slow-moving influences like gravity and light. There are also deeper, quieter links that bind parts of reality into unified states, regardless of distance. Some physicists have described this as the universe having an underlying coherence, a sense in which separation is, in some contexts, more apparent than real. Not everything is entangled with everything else, but the possibility of such connection hints at a deeper unity beneath the surface. To bring this back to a gentle metaphor, imagine a large orchestra spread across a wide stage. Each musician sits far from the others. No one is whispering instructions across the room, and yet, when the conductor lifts a hand, the music moves together. The coordination does not come from messages passed between players, but from shared participation in a single structure. Entanglement is not consciousness, it is not awareness, but it is a kind of togetherness that exists independently of observation. It suggests that the universe has ways of remaining unified even while appearing fragmented. This idea becomes especially interesting when paired with everything we have explored so far. A universe with a web-like structure. A universe that preserves information. A universe that updates its state continuously without forgetting. And now a universe that allows deep connections to exist across space without requiring signals to travel. Put together, these features begin to resemble something familiar, though still distant. They resemble the conditions that make integrated systems possible. Systems where parts influence one another not just locally, but as part of a larger whole. In the brain, consciousness seems to rely on such integration. Information from different regions comes together, forming a unified experience rather than isolated fragments. Distance within the brain matters less than connection. What matters is how tightly activity is coordinated. The universe, of course, operates on scales far beyond neurons and synapses, but entanglement hints that coordination is not limited by proximity, that the universe has at its foundation a way of being whole without being centralized. Some thinkers have wondered whether entanglement could act as a kind of underlying connective tissue for reality, not a channel for messages, but a background harmony that allows the universe to behave as a single, consistent system. Again, it is important to move slowly here. These ideas do not imply intention, thought, or experience. They do not suggest the universe is watching itself or responding to our actions. They simply suggest that reality is more interconnected than our everyday senses reveal. There is something calming in this, the sense that separation is not as final as it seems, that even across immense distances, parts of the universe remain quietly aligned, participating in a shared structure that transcends location. As you rest with this idea, you may notice that it does not demand attention. It does not insist on being understood fully. It simply invites a shift in perspective, a reminder that the universe, at its deepest level, may be less like a collection of isolated pieces and more like a single unfolding process, a process where connection exists first and separation is something that emerges later as a useful approximation. In that light, the question of whether the universe could ever resemble a mind feels less abrupt. Minds, after all, are not defined by the absence of distance, but by the presence of integration, by the ability of many parts to participate in a shared state. Whether the universe ever crosses that threshold remains unknown, but entanglement shows us that the groundwork for deep connection is already woven into reality itself. For now, let this idea settle without effort. Like two distant stars sharing a hidden alignment, it does not need to be seen to be real. It only needs to exist quietly as part of the universe's gentle insistence on togetherness. Up to this point, we've been noticing how the universe connects, preserves, and coordinates. We've seen that it forms vast networks, keeps careful track of its own history, and allows deep relationships to exist even across enormous distances. And now, very gently, we arrive at a question that feels different from the others. Not larger, but more intimate. At what point does a system stop being merely busy and begin to feel like something? This is not a question about intelligence or intention or thought. It is a quieter question about experience, about the difference between a collection of parts doing their own thing and a whole that begins to have an inner life, however faint or fleeting. In science, this transition is often described with a single word, emergence. But the word itself can sound heavier than the idea it represents. Emergence does not mean that something magical is added from the outside. It means that when enough simple parts interact in the right way, new patterns appear that were not obvious when looking at the parts alone. To see this without effort, consider an ant colony. An individual ant follows very simple rules. It moves, it responds to chemical trails, it reacts to nearby ants. No single ant understands the shape of the colony, the location of food stores, or the long-term survival of the group. And yet, when thousands or millions of ants interact, something remarkable happens. The colony behaves as though it has a plan. It allocates resources, adapts to changes, and responds intelligently to threats. There is no master ant giving orders. The intelligence of the colony arises from the relationships between ants, not from the ants themselves. Or think about weather. A single molecule of air has no concept of a storm. It moves according to basic physical rules, colliding with other molecules transferring energy. But when vast numbers of these simple interactions combine, complex patterns emerge, winds form, clouds gather, storm systems organize themselves, sometimes growing gentle and steady, sometimes fierce and dramatic. The storm is not a thing separate from the air. It is a pattern the air falls into. Music offers another familiar example. A single note is just a vibration. Even a sequence of notes may feel simple. But when many notes are arranged in relation to one another, when rhythm, harmony, and timing align, something new appears. Emotion, tension, release. The music is not contained in any one note. It lives in the relationships between them. In each of these cases, nothing fundamentally new is added. The same ingredients are present throughout. What changes is how tightly they are woven together. This is the heart of emergence. It is not about complexity for its own sake, but about organization. About parts becoming linked in a way that allows the whole to behave differently than the sum of its pieces. When scientists talk about consciousness as something that may arise rather than something that is installed, this is what they mean. There is no single moment where experience suddenly switches on. No clear line where a system crosses from lifeless to aware. Instead, there may be a gradual deepening, a slow thickening of relationships, a point where information does not just move, but begins to echo within itself. In the human brain, this process unfolds over time. A newborn brain is active, responsive, alive, but its inner world is likely very different from that of an adult. As connections strengthen, as patterns repeat and stabilize, experience becomes richer. Memory forms, a sense of self gradually appears. Nothing new was added to the brain, it grew into itself. Now, carefully and without urgency, we can ask whether this idea might apply more broadly. If emergence allows experience to appear in biological systems, could it also apply, in some distant and unfamiliar way, to other kinds of systems that process information? This is not the same as saying that every complex system is conscious. Most are not. A storm does not feel the rain. An ant colony does not dream. Emergence alone is not enough. But emergence shows us something important. That experience, when it appears, does not need to be fundamental. It can be a property of organization, a pattern that arises when information becomes sufficiently connected, sufficiently responsive, sufficiently self-influencing. The universe, as we've seen, is rich in complexity. It contains vast networks. It preserves information. It allows interactions to ripple outward over time. It develops structure slowly, patiently, without rushing toward any particular outcome. Seen through this lens, consciousness no longer looks like an alien intrusion into a cold, mechanical cosmos. It begins to look like a natural extension of how complex systems behave when given enough time and freedom to organize. This does not mean the universe itself is conscious in any familiar sense. It may not experience anything at all, but it may contain the ingredients from which experience can arise, ingredients that, in rare and localized places, have come together tightly enough to produce inner worlds. In that sense, human consciousness may not be an exception to the universe's story, but one of its quieter expressions, a small region where complexity has folded back on itself, creating a space where information does not just flow outward, but loops, reflects, and settles. There is something deeply calming about this perspective. It does not elevate consciousness to something mystical and unreachable. Nor does it reduce it to something trivial. Instead, it places experience gently within the universe's ongoing unfolding, neither imposed from outside nor entirely accidental. As you rest with this idea, there is no need to push it further. Emergence works slowly. It does not announce itself. It appears when conditions are right, and often goes unnoticed while it is happening. Perhaps the universe too unfolds in this way, not rushing toward awareness, not aiming for meaning, but quietly exploring what becomes possible when simple rules interact over immense spans of time. And perhaps in doing so, it has allowed moments where reality begins, just barely, to feel like something from the inside. Let that thought remain soft, like a melody that forms not because anyone planned it, but because the notes happen to find one another in just the right way. As we rest with the idea that experience can emerge when many simple parts become deeply organized, another quiet question naturally forms, not about how many parts there are or how fast they move, but about how well they belong together. What turns a collection of activity into a unified experience? In everyday life, we already sense the difference. A room full of people speaking at once produces noise, but when voices align into harmony, something else appears. A choir does not add anything new to the voices themselves. It simply weaves them together so tightly that a single musical presence emerges. This intuition sits at the heart of a scientific idea known as integrated information theory. But rather than treating it as a formal framework with symbols and measures, we can approach it as a simple question. How inseparable is a system's activity? How difficult would it be to pull it apart without losing something essential? Imagine listening to a single instrument playing alone. The sound is clear, distinct, and complete in its own way. Now imagine an orchestra playing together. Each instrument still exists, but the experience is no longer reducible to any one part. If you remove enough voices, the music itself changes character. Something that existed only in their togetherness disappears. This sense of togetherness is what matters. In a brain, different regions process different kinds of information. Some handle vision, others manage movement, memory, or emotion. On their own, these processes remain isolated. But when they interact in a tightly coordinated way, they form a unified experience. You do not see colours in one moment, shapes in another, and meaning in a third. You experience a single, continuous world. The experience is not located in any one place. It lives in the relationships between places. What makes this idea especially gentle is that it does not require consciousness to be all or nothing. Instead, it allows for degrees. A system can be more or less integrated, more or less unified. Experience, if it arises, may be faint or rich, depending on how tightly information is woven together. To make this feel intuitive, imagine a conversation held through scattered notes passed between strangers. Information moves, but slowly and awkwardly. Now imagine a face-to-face conversation. Words flow, expressions respond instantly. Meaning builds effortlessly. The difference is not the content, but the closeness of connection. Integration is about closeness, not in space, but in influence. When parts of a system can affect one another quickly and deeply, the system begins to behave as a whole rather than as a collection. Changes in one part echo through the rest. Activity becomes shared. In this view, consciousness does not come from complexity alone. A system can be extremely complex yet fragmented. What matters is whether its parts are speaking to one another in a way that cannot be cleanly separated. This helps explain why certain systems feel alive and others do not. A computer processing millions of calculations per second may remain experientially empty if its operations are compartmentalized. Meanwhile, a simpler biological system may host experience if its activity is tightly interwoven. The idea also invites us to think differently about the universe. Earlier, we noticed that the universe forms networks, that it preserves information, that it allows deep connections across space. Now we can gently ask whether any part of the universe exhibits the kind of togetherness that would allow experience to arise. This is not a question with an answer we can measure directly, but it is a way of framing our curiosity. Instead of asking whether the universe is conscious, we ask whether any part of it is integrated in a way that resists being broken into independent pieces. On cosmic scales, most processes remain loosely connected. Galaxies drift, clusters form, influence spreads slowly. The universe, as a whole, may be too sparse, too stretched, too slow to host anything like a unified inner life. And yet, in small pockets, integration becomes intense. In brains, information loops rapidly. Activity feeds back into itself. Signals do not simply pass through, they reverberate. Over time, stable patterns emerge that persist long enough to feel like continuity. This suggests something important. Consciousness, if it appears, is not evenly distributed. It gathers where integration is strongest. It emerges where information is woven tightly enough to resist falling apart. Seen this way, human experience becomes less mysterious. We are not animated by a special substance. We are shaped by a special pattern. A pattern where information does not merely flow forward, but circles back, binding past and present into a living moment. This also means that consciousness is fragile. It depends on balance. Too much separation and experience fragments. Too much rigidity and it freezes. What allows awareness to exist is a narrow window where connection and flexibility meet. The universe, vast and patient, contains regions that fall into this window. Most of space does not, and that is not a flaw. It is simply how integration distributes itself naturally. As you let this idea settle, you may notice that it carries no demand. It does not insist that the universe must be conscious. It only offers a way to think about how consciousness, wherever it appears, might arise. From this perspective, experience is not an accident, but neither is it guaranteed. It is a possibility that emerges when information becomes inseparable enough to form a whole. Perhaps that is all consciousness ever needed to be. Not a spark from outside reality, but a gentle coherence within it. For now, let this sense of togetherness rest. Like voices fading after a song, the unity remains even as individual sounds dissolve, and in that quiet coherence something soft and continuous lingers, unhurried and content to simply be. As we've been slowly building this picture, a quiet shift has taken place. We began by noticing structure, then function, then the way information can become tightly woven into unified experience. Now, without rushing, we arrive at an idea that is older than modern science, yet still strangely at home within it. What if consciousness is not something that suddenly appears at a certain level of complexity, but something that has always been present in some minimal form throughout reality? This perspective is known as Panpsychism. The word itself can sound intimidating, but the idea beneath it is surprisingly gentle. It does not claim that rocks have thoughts or that electrons have feelings. Instead, it suggests that the capacity for experience, however faint, may be a basic feature of the universe, much like mass or charge. To understand this without discomfort, it helps to let go of human-centered images. When we hear the word consciousness, we often imagine inner monologues, emotions, and memories. But these are rich, complex forms of experience. Panpsychism speaks instead of something far simpler, a tiny spark of sensitivity, a minimal something it is like to be a system, even if that something is unimaginably faint. A helpful image is that of warmth in embers, A roaring fire is obvious and intense. Embers, by contrast, glow quietly. They do not leap or roar, but they still carry heat. Panpsychism suggests that complex minds are like fires, while the rest of the universe may be filled with embers, not burning brightly, not thinking, but not entirely cold either. This idea did not originate in laboratories or equations. It appeared in ancient philosophies long before modern physics existed. Thinkers wondered whether mind and matter were truly separate, or whether they were two aspects of the same underlying reality. For a long time, science set these questions aside, focusing instead on what could be measured and predicted. But as science has pushed deeper into the nature of matter, space, and time, the old questions have returned quietly without demanding answers. Modern physics describes a universe where particles are not solid objects, but patterns of interaction, where fields extend everywhere, where separation is sometimes an illusion. In such a universe, the idea that experience could be woven into reality itself feels less strange than it once did. Importantly, panpsychism does not claim that every part of the universe is conscious in the way we are conscious. It does not flatten all experience into sameness. Instead, it allows for vast differences in richness and organisation. Most of reality, under this view, would possess only the faintest glimmer of inner life, far below anything we would recognise as awareness. What matters is not the presence of mind everywhere, but the continuity between the simplest forms of existence and the most complex ones. This continuity helps address a long-standing puzzle. If consciousness only appears when systems become sufficiently complex, then where does it come from? At what precise point does experience switch on? Panpsychism sidesteps this question by suggesting that experience does not suddenly appear, but gradually deepens as systems become more integrated. From this perspective, complexity does not create consciousness out of nothing. It amplifies something that was already there. This does not make consciousness trivial. Quite the opposite. It suggests that the universe has always had the potential for experience, even if that potential remained dormant or dim for most of its history. To keep this grounded, it is important to emphasize what panpsychism does not say. It does not suggest that atoms make decisions. It does not suggest that planets have desires. It does not imply intention, thought, or awareness at cosmic scales. It only suggests that the building blocks of reality may not be entirely empty of inequality. Some scientists and philosophers find this idea appealing because it avoids the need to explain how something as profound as experience could emerge from a completely non-experiential foundation. Others remain skeptical, pointing out that panpsychism is difficult to test and easy to misinterpret. Both positions can be held calmly. Panpsychism is not a conclusion, but a lens, a way of framing the mystery without forcing it closed. What makes this idea especially suitable for a quiet exploration like ours is its humility. It does not place humans at the centre of the universe. It does not elevate our experience above all others. Instead, it places us on a continuum, part of a much larger story of increasing organisation and integration. In this story, human consciousness is not a miracle that breaks the rules of physics. It is an especially intricate arrangement of processes that have been unfolding since the universe began. If this feels unsettling, it can also feel comforting. It suggests that experience is not an anomaly, not a rare accident in an otherwise indifferent cosmos. It suggests that the universe has always been capable of producing inner life, given the right conditions, and perhaps that is enough. We do not need to decide whether panpsychism is true. We do not need to commit to it as a belief. It can remain a possibility, a gentle hypothesis that sits quietly alongside others. As you rest with this idea, notice how it shifts the tone of our exploration. The universe no longer feels like a machine that accidentally produced minds. It feels more like a process that has always contained the seeds of experience, slowly bringing them into bloom where structure allows. This does not mean the universe is awake. It does not mean it is thinking. It means only that the boundary between mind and matter may be softer than we once imagined. And in that softness, there is room for wonder without urgency. Like embers glowing in the dark, the idea does not demand attention. It simply offers a faint warmth, a quiet presence, inviting you to sit with it as long as you like, or to let it fade gently into the background as you drift toward rest. By now, we have gently loosened several boundaries that once felt firm. We've seen that structure can resemble networks, that information can flow and integrate, that experience may arise gradually from organization, and that some thinkers even wonder whether the seeds of experience were present from the very beginning. None of this forces a conclusion, but it does invite us to widen the frame one last time, without urgency and without certainty. If experience depends on organization, and if organization exists not only in brains, but throughout the universe, then where exactly should we stop looking for the conditions that allow awareness to appear? Most discussions of consciousness focus on objects within space and time, brains, bodies, systems that occupy locations and change over moments. But modern physics has slowly reshaped our understanding of space and time themselves. They are no longer seen as a passive stage on which events happen. Instead, they are active participants in the unfolding of reality. Space stretches, time slows, paths curve. The universe responds to matter and energy by reshaping the very framework in which motion occurs. This makes it natural to ask a very careful question. Not whether space-time thinks or plans or reflects, but whether space-time as a structure could possess a form of sensitivity, a way of registering change, a responsiveness built into its fabric. To approach this gently, imagine a stretched sheet of fabric. Place a heavy object at its center, and the fabric curves. Roll a smaller object nearby, and its path bends in response. The fabric is not alive. It does not notice the objects, and yet it responds. Its shape reflects what is happening within it. Now imagine that this fabric is not just two-dimensional, but woven through with countless threads, layered, flexible and dynamic. Imagine that every change leaves a subtle imprint, and that those imprints influence what happens next. Over time, the fabric does not simply hold events, it participates in them. This is not a metaphor for awareness, but for responsiveness. And responsiveness is something space-time already possesses. In this light, some thinkers have wondered whether awareness in its most minimal form could be understood not as something added to space-time, but as something that emerges from its activity. Not awareness of objects or thoughts, but awareness of change itself, a sensitivity to difference, a quiet registration of before and after. This idea does not require that space-time has a point of view. It does not require a center. It does not require intention. It only suggests that the fabric of reality may be more like a process than a container. When space and time are treated as dynamic, interconnected structures, they begin to resemble the kinds of systems where emergent properties arise. They have relationships. They evolve. They influence and are influenced. They form patterns that persist and adapt. Once again, this does not mean awareness is present everywhere, or in any way we would recognize. Most of space-time may be far too diffuse, too slow, too simple to host anything like experience. But the question itself becomes meaningful in a way it once was not. Instead of asking whether consciousness exists only inside certain objects, we begin to ask whether it might be tied to the organization of reality itself. This shift matters, because it allows us to stop treating consciousness as an isolated miracle. It becomes something that fits naturally into the universe's ongoing story, even if it remains rare and fragile. There is a quiet elegance in this possibility. The universe does not need to wake up. It does not need to observe itself. It only needs to respond consistently to change. Over time, such responsiveness can give rise to stable patterns. In some of those patterns, experience may flicker into being. This perspective also softens the boundary between observer and observed. If space-time participates in events, then observation is not something that happens only at the end of a chain inside a mind. It becomes part of the process itself. The universe is not a static picture waiting to be seen. It is an ongoing interaction, unfolding whether or not anyone is watching. For human beings, this can feel both humbling and grounding. Our awareness does not float above the universe as something separate. It is embedded within the same fabric that shapes stars and galaxies. Our thoughts, sensations, and memories are patterns within space-time, no less physical and no more privileged than any other pattern. And yet, they are special to us. They are where the universe becomes intimate. As you rest with this idea, notice how it asks very little of you. It does not demand belief. It does not insist on reinterpreting everything you know. It simply invites you to consider that awareness, at its most basic level, may not be a stranger to reality. It may be woven into it, quietly, as potential rather than fact. The universe may not be conscious in any familiar sense. It may not feel, think, or remember, but it may be structured in such a way that feeling and thinking can arise naturally within it, without contradiction. And perhaps that is enough. There is something deeply calming about letting the question remain open, about allowing the universe to be vast, complex, and unfinished, about resisting the urge to pin awareness down to a single place or explanation. As the night continues and your own thoughts begin to slow, you might imagine space-time not as an empty backdrop but as a living geometry of change, a quiet participant in every event, a framework that responds, adapts, and carries the imprint of all that happens within it. Not awake, not asleep, simply present. And in that presence, there is room for experience to appear wherever conditions allow, like a gentle ripple forming on a still surface, then fading without ever needing to announce itself. Let that image soften and stretch. There is nowhere it needs to go. It can remain exactly where it is, suspended between curiosity and rest, as the universe continues its slow, patient unfolding. After wandering through ideas as large as space-time and as subtle as awareness itself, it feels natural to return to something closer, something familiar. Because no matter how expansive the universe may be, this exploration ultimately circles back to a simple fact. You are here, experiencing it. Human consciousness is not separate from the universe it observes. It is one of its patterns. Each of us carries a mind that feels intimate, private, and deeply personal. Thoughts appear and disappear. Memories surface without warning. Sensations come and go like weather passing through an inner landscape. And yet, beneath all this, the brain remains a physical structure, shaped by the same rules that govern stars and galaxies. This is where the idea of being a small mind inside a very large one begins to feel less poetic and more literal. Your brain is not a thing that exists apart from the universe. It is matter organized in a particular way, arranged so that information flows, loops, and settles into patterns that feel like experience. The atoms that make up your thoughts were forged in ancient stars. The energy that sustains your awareness follows the same laws that guide cosmic expansion. In this sense, when you think, the universe is thinking in a very localized way. Not because the universe intended this to happen, but because it allows it to happen. Given enough time, enough structure, and enough integration, small regions of reality become reflective. They do not just change, they notice change. They do not just exist, they experience existing. A helpful image here is that of a river. A river flows steadily from its source to the sea. Along its path, whirlpools form. Each whirlpool has its own shape, its own motion, its own brief identity. But no whirlpool is separate from the river. It exists only because the river flows in a particular way at that point. Human minds may be like whirlpools in the flow of the universe. Each mind is a temporary pattern, a local concentration of activity where information circles back on itself, creating continuity and perspective. The pattern feels distinct while it lasts, but it is always sustained by the larger flow in which it exists. This image helps soften a tension that often arises when thinking about consciousness. We tend to ask whether minds are something added to the universe or something the universe produces, but perhaps that question misses the point. Minds may simply be what certain parts of the universe look like from the inside when conditions are right. From the outside, a brain is a network of cells exchanging signals. From the inside, it is a world. Neither description cancels the other. They describe the same process from different perspectives. This idea carries a quiet humility. It does not place humans above the rest of nature. It does not suggest that we are the goal or the culmination of cosmic history. Instead, it suggests that we are participants, brief, intricate expressions of a much larger unfolding. And yet, this does not diminish the value of individual experience. A whirlpool may be temporary, but it is real while it exists. Its motion matters. Its shape is unique. In the same way, each conscious life is meaningful precisely because it is finite and situated. There is also something deeply grounding about realizing that awareness is not an anomaly. It is not a glitch in an otherwise indifferent universe. It is a possibility that the universe naturally contains, expressed wherever matter becomes organized enough to support it. This perspective gently reshapes how we see ourselves. We are not strangers in a vast and alien cosmos. We are made of it. Our thoughts, emotions, and questions are part of the same reality that shapes galaxies and bends space-time. When you wonder about the universe is wandering through you. This does not mean the universe has intentions or goals. It means only that reflection has become possible in small pockets of reality. That information has folded back on itself in a way that allows it to be aware of its own patterns, and this awareness, however localized, changes everything. It allows curiosity, it allows care, it allows meaning to emerge not as something imposed from outside, but as something felt from within. Seen this way, consciousness is not a privilege bestowed on humans alone. It is a fragile achievement, dependent on balance, integration, and time. It can appear, flourish briefly, and fade, and that fragility is part of what makes it precious. As you sit with this idea, you may notice that it does not ask you to think harder. It asks you to relax into a sense of belonging, to feel yourself as part of a process far larger than any single life, yet intimate enough to include your own breath, your own thoughts, your own quiet awareness in this moment. The universe does not need to notice you for your experience to matter. Your experience matters because it exists, because it is part of the universe's ongoing story of becoming more complex, more connected, and in rare places more reflective. And perhaps that is the most comforting thought of all, that you're not merely looking out at the universe from the outside, you're looking from within it. A small mind carried along by a vast flow, forming its own gentle whirl for a time, before eventually returning to the larger current. For now, there is no need to think about where that current leads. It is enough to feel the movement, to notice the quiet continuity between the thoughts passing through your mind and the deeper rhythms of the cosmos that make those thoughts possible. Like a river at night, flowing steadily under starlight, the universe moves on, and for a while, you move with it, aware, reflective, and very much a part of the whole. As we remain close to the human scale, it's natural for attention to drift toward the quieter corners of experience, not the obvious moments of thought and decision, but the subtle feelings that arrive without explanation, a sudden sense of familiarity, a feeling that something is about to happen, a memory that surfaces without being summoned. These moments often feel mysterious because they do not follow the usual rules of cause and effect that our waking minds prefer. They do not announce where they came from, and they do not always explain why they matter, and yet they are deeply human experiences, shared across cultures and across time. Rather than treating these moments as puzzles to be solved, we can approach them as textures of consciousness, as gentle side effects of living inside a system that is constantly integrating information, past and present, expectation and perception. Memory, for instance, is not a storage room filled with neatly labelled boxes. It is more like a landscape that reshapes itself each time it is visited. When you remember something, you are not retrieving a fixed record, you are recreating a pattern. The act of remembering slightly alters what is remembered. This means that the past is never entirely past. It continues to participate in the present, subtly influencing how the world feels right now. From this perspective, familiarity is not surprising. The brain is constantly comparing what it is sensing to what it has sensed before. Most of the time, this process remains invisible, but occasionally the comparison surfaces as a feeling, a sense that this moment resembles another, even if you cannot say how or why. This feeling does not require anything supernatural. It can arise simply because the brain is very good at pattern matching, and sometimes those patterns overlap in unexpected ways. Intuition works in a similar fashion. It is not a voice from elsewhere. It is the result of countless small experiences, memories, and associations being quietly integrated beneath conscious awareness. When enough of these influences align, they can produce a feeling that points in a certain direction before conscious reasoning has time to catch up. This does not mean intuition is always correct, but it does mean it is often meaningful. It reflects the brain's ability to sense coherence, to notice when things fit together or feel out of place. Seen through the lens we've been developing, these subtle experiences are not glitches in a larger system. They are natural expressions of a mind that exist within a deeply interconnected reality. Earlier we spoke about the idea of cosmic memory, not as a literal archive where events are stored, but as a metaphor. A way of describing how information leaves traces, how past interactions shape future possibilities, how nothing that happens is entirely erased. In the universe at large, every interaction leaves an imprint. Light carries information across space. Matter remembers its history and its structure. Even empty regions of space retain the influence of what once passed through them. Human memory may be a local reflection of this broader principle, a small-scale version of how reality preserves patterns over time. This does not mean that your memories are stored in the universe beyond you, or that the cosmos is keeping a record of your life. It simply means that remembering is not an isolated phenomenon. It is part of a wider tendency for systems to carry forward the effects of what has come before. Occasionally, people describe moments of déjà vu as if reality briefly slipped out of alignment. But we do not need to imagine cracks in the universe to account for these experiences. A feeling of familiarity can arise when the brain's internal models briefly match the present moment more closely than usual. The feeling passes because the alignment passes. What matters is not whether these moments reveal something hidden, but what they reveal about how minds work. They show us that experience is not constructed moment by moment from scratch. It is layered, influenced by echoes of the past, expectations of the future, and subtle patterns that span time. From within this layered process, it can sometimes feel as though we are brushing against something larger, not because we are, but because our minds are tuned to coherence. When patterns line up just right, the sense of meaning intensifies. This is where it is easy to overreach, to turn feelings into claims, to mistake resonance for revelation. But it is also where we can pause and simply appreciate the texture of experience without needing to explain it away or inflate it into something more. The universe does not need to send messages for these moments to matter. Your mind does not need access to anything beyond itself to feel deeply connected. Connection can arise simply because you are part of a system that remembers, anticipates, and integrates. In quiet moments, this integration can feel almost spacious, as if the boundary between inner and outer experience softens, as if the present moment carries more depth than usual. There is no need to interpret this as contact with a cosmic intelligence. It can remain what it is, a gentle alignment, a feeling of fit, a reminder that consciousness is not static but fluid, shaped by time and context. As you listen, you may notice your own memories drifting through awareness, small fragments, images, feelings without clear labels. Let them come and go. They are not interruptions, they are part of the mind's natural rhythm. Just as the universe carries traces of its past within its structure, your mind carries traces of your own history within each moment of awareness. These traces do not weigh you down. They give depth to experience, and in that depth, familiarity sometimes appears without explanation. Intuition sometimes nudges without words. Meaning sometimes feels close, even when it cannot be named. There is nothing you need to do with these moments. You do not need to follow them or analyze them. You can let them pass like soft clouds across a wide sky. They are not signs, they are sensations, and they belong exactly where they are. As the night continues and thoughts begin to loosen their grip, these subtle experiences often become more noticeable. Not because they are stronger, but because the mind is quieter, less busy, more receptive. In this quiet, it is enough to notice how naturally awareness weaves together past and present, memory and sensation, how effortlessly it creates a sense of continuity, even as each moment slips away. And perhaps, in this gentle weaving, you can rest, knowing that nothing needs to be solved, that experience in all its familiar strangeness is doing exactly what it has always done, integrating, remembering, feeling its way forward. As the exploration turns toward one of the most tender edges of experience, the pace naturally slows, not because the subject is heavy, but because it deserves gentleness. Every conscious life, no matter how rich or fleeting, eventually reaches a point where its familiar patterns loosen and change. This is not a failure of the system. It is part of how patterns behave. From the perspective we've been developing, consciousness is not a solid object. It is a process, a flowing arrangement of activity that maintains its shape for a time, much like a wave travelling across the surface of the sea. A wave is real. You can see it rise, feel its motion, watch it carry energy forward, and yet it is never made of the same water from one moment to the next. The wave exists because of movement, not because of permanence. When the conditions that sustain it change, the wave does not vanish into nothing. It simply returns its motion to the larger body of water. This image offers a way to think about death that does not rely on belief or denial. It does not claim that personal awareness continues unchanged, nor does it suggest that experience disappears without trace. Instead, It frames death as a transition of pattern. The elements that make up a conscious life do not leave the universe when that life ends. The matter remains, the energy disperses, the influences ripple outward in subtle ways, through memories, through changed relationships, through effects that cannot be fully traced. What changes is the organization. The tightly integrated pattern that once produced a continuous inner world gradually loosens. Feedback loops weaken. Coherence fades. The whirlpool smooths back into the river. This is not a loss in the sense that something essential is taken away from reality. It is a reconfiguration, a return of activity to the larger flow from which it arose. For many people, this idea feels less frightening than the alternatives. It does not promise reunion or reward. It does not threaten annihilation. It simply acknowledges that no pattern, no matter how intricate, remains fixed forever. There is a quiet dignity in this view. It treats individual experience as meaningful without insisting on its permanence. It allows a life to matter because it happened, not because it must continue indefinitely. In nature, cycles of emergence and dissolution are everywhere. Stars burn for millions or billions of years, then release their material back into space. Forests grow, change, and give way to new growth. Even mountains rise and erode. None of these processes are failures. They are expressions of continuity through change. Human lives may follow a similar rhythm, not identical but analogous. Each life is a temporary concentration of order, shaped by history, environment, and chance. When that concentration relaxes, the universe does not lose something foreign to it. It reabsorbs one of its own patterns. This way of thinking does not ask you to ignore grief or longing. Loss still hurts. Absence is still felt. The end of a conscious life leaves a space that cannot be filled by explanation alone. But it may soften the sharpest edges of fear, replacing them with a sense of belonging to a larger process. From this perspective, death is not a door that slams shut, nor is it a passage that must lead somewhere else. It is a settling, a quiet return to the wider dynamics that have always supported existence. There's also something calming about recognizing that no experience is wasted. Even if consciousness does not persist in a personal form, the fact that it existed at all is enough. The universe has been changed by it, however slightly, and those changes become part of what follows. This does not require belief in a cosmic ledger or memory. Influence does not need to be recorded to be real. A conversation changes how people think. A kindness alters a life's direction. A presence leaves impressions that echo long after it is gone. In this way, continuity does not depend on individual awareness continuing. It depends on participation. Your life participates in the universe. It shapes it, briefly and locally. When the pattern that is you eventually loosens, that participation does not vanish. It becomes part of the larger flow of cause and effect that carries everything forward. As you rest with this idea, notice how little it asks of you. It does not require certainty. It does not ask you to imagine what cannot be known. It simply offers a way to hold finitude without panic. The end of a pattern does not erase its having been. A wave does not need to last forever to have moved the sea, and perhaps that is enough. In the quiet of this moment, you might feel your own awareness as something gentle and transient. Thoughts arise, linger, and fade. Sensations come and go. Even now, small endings are happening constantly, unnoticed, as each moment gives way to the next. This is not something to resist. It is something to settle into. Just as sleep itself is a temporary loosening of conscious structure, a nightly return to a quieter mode of being, the larger transitions of life may follow a similar rhythm. Not an ending in the dramatic sense, but a soft shift in how patterns hold together. As the night deepens and your own thoughts begin to thin, there is comfort in knowing that rest is not a disappearance. It is change of state, a gentle return to a broader, slower flow. Nothing needs to be held onto, nothing needs to be solved. The universe continues carrying forward all that has been in ways both visible and subtle, and for now you remain here, aware, present, part of a vast process that knows how to form patterns and how to let them go. After resting with ideas of continuity and return, it feels natural to look forward again, not toward conclusions but toward possibility. If patterns can emerge, stabilize and dissolve, a quiet question arises on its own. Do these patterns merely repeat, or do they slowly change in a way that resembles learning? When we use the word learn, it is important to soften it immediately. Learning in this context does not mean intention, planning or desire. It does not imply a goal or a destination. It refers instead to a tendency systems have to settle into habits over time, to repeat what works, to reinforce what persists, to wear paths into the landscape of possibility. You can see this in the simplest places. Walk across a field once and the grass springs back. Walk across it every day and a path appears. No one decided where the path should go. No intelligence designed it. It formed because repeated movement made certain routes easier than others. In this sense, the path is a memory. Not stored anywhere in particular, but embodied in the shape of the ground itself. Nature is full of such memories. Rivers carve valleys by flowing the same way again and again. Snow compacts into ice under repeated pressure. Even weather patterns, though chaotic in the short term, develop long-term tendencies shaped by geography and climate. None of this requires awareness. It requires only repetition and feedback. Now consider the universe as a whole. It began in a state of extraordinary simplicity. Over time it expanded, cooled and diversified. Structures formed, forces balanced. Stable arrangements emerged from atoms to stars to galaxies. At each step, some patterns persisted while others faded. The universe did not explore every possibility equally. It gradually favoured certain configurations because they were stable under the conditions that existed. This is not learning in the human sense, but it is not random either. It is a kind of habit formation on a cosmic scale. Physical laws themselves may be understood in this light. Rather than rigid rules imposed from outside, they can be seen as deeply entrenched patterns. Ways the universe reliably behaves because those behaviours have proven stable across vast spans of time. This idea does not suggest that laws change easily, or that the universe experiments with new rules at will. It suggests only that regularity may arise naturally from repetition, that what we call laws could be the universe's most enduring habits. There is something quietly elegant about this view. It removes the need for an external rule maker without reducing reality to chaos. Order emerges not because it is commanded, but because it lasts. From this perspective, evolution becomes a familiar theme, not limited to biology. In living systems, traits that fit their environment tend to persist. In the universe at large, structures that can maintain themselves under prevailing conditions tend to remain. Stars form because gravity gathers matter. They shine because nuclear processes release energy. They endure because the balance between inward pull and outward pressure holds. When that balance fails, the star changes form. It does not fail. It transitions. Over time, the universe fills with the results of these transitions. Heavier elements form. New kinds of structures become possible. The range of patterns expands. Seen this way, the universe is not learning toward anything. It is simply accumulating history. Each stage sets the conditions for what can follow. If consciousness arises within this unfolding, it does so not as a target but as a consequence. A pattern that becomes possible once enough complexity and integration are present. This makes the idea of a learning universe feel less dramatic and more grounded. There is no cosmic mind adjusting its strategy. There is only a vast process that carries forward what endures, slowly shaping the space of possibility. Still, it is natural to wonder whether this accumulation of history creates something like preference, whether certain patterns become easier to form because they have formed before, whether the universe in a sense remembers what has worked. Here again we can remain cautious. Memory does not need to imply awareness. A valley remembers the river without knowing it. A path remembers footsteps without intention. The universe may remember in this quiet way, through structure, through constraint, through the shaping of what comes next by what has already been. If this is so, then learning is not something the universe does. It is something the universe is. A continuous adjustment, guided by stability rather than desire. For those of us living inside this process, this perspective can feel both humbling and reassuring. We are not part of a plan. We are part of a story that unfolds according to conditions, chance, and persistence. Our own learning mirrors this larger pattern. We do not choose all the habits we form. Experience shapes us. Repetition carves paths in the mind. Over time, some ways of thinking become easier, others harder to access. We are not separate from the universe in this respect. We are one of its many learning surfaces. As you sit with this idea, notice how it changes the feeling of the future. The universe does not rush toward it. It drifts into it, carrying forward what holds together, letting go of what does not. There is no pressure here, no deadline, no final exam the cosmos must pass, just a slow, patient unfolding, guided by the quiet logic of persistence. And perhaps that is enough to let the question rest. Whether or not the universe learns, it clearly remembers, not in words or thoughts, but in structure, in the shapes of galaxies, in the paths of particles, in the conditions that allow new patterns, including minds like ours, to briefly appear. For now, let that image settle. A universe not striving, not planning, but gradually shaping itself through time, like grass yielding to footsteps, like water carving stone, like habits forming without intention. The night does not hurry toward morning, it simply continues, and in that continuation, everything that exists finds its place for as long as it holds. After wondering whether the universe accumulates habits, whether it carries forward what endures, it becomes natural to turn inward again, not to search for rules or commandments, but to notice how this perspective quietly reshapes the way life feels from the inside. If we live within a reality that is deeply interconnected, where patterns influence one another across scales, then meaning does not need to arrive as an instruction. It can arise as awareness. Ethics, in this view, is not a list of duties imposed from above. It is a sensitivity to connection, a recognition that actions do not vanish when they occur, but ripple outward through systems that are already tightly woven. You can feel this on the smallest scale. A single tone of voice can change the atmosphere of a room. A moment of patience can soften an entire conversation. A careless word can linger long after it is spoken. These effects do not require intention to be real. They happen because minds are connected, because experience is shaped by interaction. Now gently widen that lens. Human beings are not isolated observers standing outside the universe. We are participants within it. Our choices, however small, are part of the same web of cause and effect that shapes weather patterns, ecosystems, and galaxies. This does not make us powerful in a dramatic sense. It makes us relevant. From this perspective, responsibility does not mean control. It means responsiveness. To be responsive is simply to notice that what we do matters because it participates, not because the universe is watching, not because there is a score being kept, but because connection amplifies influence. This way of thinking naturally extends care beyond the boundaries we often draw. Not because we are required to care, but because awareness of interdependence makes indifference harder to maintain. When you recognize that your own mind is a pattern within a much larger pattern, it becomes easier to see other beings as patterns too, different in shape, duration, and complexity, but not categorically separate. Their experiences, however unlike your own, are part of the same unfolding. This does not mean all forms of life are equal in the same way. It does not flatten differences or deny complexity. It simply softens the edges of exclusion. It encourages humility. In a universe that may be quietly sensitive to structure and change, harm does not need to be punished to matter. It matters because it disturbs patterns that support coherence. Care matters because it stabilizes them. This framing removes urgency without removing meaning. There is no cosmic judge waiting to reward or condemn. There is only the reality that actions shape the systems they move through. Seen this way, ethics becomes less about obligation and more about alignment, about noticing when actions resonate with the larger flow and when they create unnecessary friction. You may notice that this kind of alignment often feels calm. Actions that respect connection tend to settle the nervous system rather than agitate it. They feel sustainable. They do not demand constant justification. This is not because they are morally superior in an abstract sense. It is because they fit the structure of an interconnected reality. From this angle, care extends naturally beyond humanity, without effort. Not as a burden, but as an expansion of perspective. Forests, oceans, and ecosystems are not resources standing apart from us. They are networks that include us. Damaging them damages the conditions that allow patterns like ours to persist. Again, this does not require guilt or fear. It requires awareness. To live inside a universe that might notice us does not mean we are being observed. It means we're embedded in processes that respond. The universe does not need eyes to reflect consequences. Feedback is enough. This idea also gently dissolves the feeling of insignificance that can arise when contemplating cosmic scale. We often assume that size determines importance, but influence does not scale linearly with mass or distance. Small events can have lasting effects if they occur at sensitive points within a system. A tiny adjustment in a river's course can reshape an entire valley over time. A small shift in temperature can alter climate patterns. A single thought can change a life's trajectory. Meaning, then, is not a matter of scale. It is a matter of position within a network. From where you are, your actions touch certain threads and not others. That is enough. You do not need to matter everywhere. You already matter somewhere. As this understanding settles, it does not ask you to become better, or wiser, or more disciplined. It simply invites you to notice connection where it already exists. To recognize that you are never acting alone, even when you feel isolated. The universe does not need to approve of you. It does not need to respond with signs or signals. Participation itself is enough to make life meaningful. As the night deepens, this awareness can feel quietly reassuring. You're not floating through an empty expanse. You're embedded in layers of relationship, influence, and feedback that extend far beyond what you can see. Nothing needs to be perfected. Nothing needs to be justified. Care arises naturally when connection is felt. And perhaps that is the most gentle ethical stance of all. Not a rulebook, not a command, but an attentiveness to how deeply woven reality already is. As your thoughts slow, you might feel this attentiveness settling too, less like a responsibility, more like a quiet understanding, that you are part of something vast, responsive and ongoing, that what you do matters not because it is judged, but because it participates. There is no need to carry this idea forward actively. It can rest with you, like a soft light that remains on even as attention fades. The universe continues, patient and interconnected, and within it, you continue too, for now. A pattern among patterns, aware enough to care and free enough to rest. As this long exploration begins to settle, there's no need to gather the ideas we visited into a final shape. Nothing here needs to be resolved or neatly understood. Like the night itself, the purpose has never been clarity alone, but quiet presence. We began with patterns and connections, with networks stretching across space and time. We wondered how information moves, how it weaves itself into structure, how complexity can begin to feel like something from the inside. We allowed ourselves to imagine a universe that is not merely empty and mechanical, but responsive, layered, and capable of giving rise to awareness in small, fragile places. And now, very gently, we let those thoughts loosen their grip. If the universe can be compared to a mind at all, it would not be a mind that rushes or insists. It would be a mind that thinks slowly, a mind that takes billions of years to form a single idea, a mind that explores possibility not through intention, but through patience. In such a universe, there is no pressure to understand everything. Understanding, like awareness itself, may be something that appears briefly, in certain conditions, then fades back into the larger flow. You do not need to carry these ideas forward. They do not need to become beliefs. They can remain what they are right now. Passing patterns, gentle curiosities, thoughts that arose because the conditions were right and that can now dissolve without effort. Notice your own body in this moment, the quiet weight of it resting, the slow rhythm of breathing, the way awareness narrows and softens when it no longer has to attend to meaning or explanation. This too is part of the universe's activity, sensation giving way to stillness, attention loosening, patterns relaxing. Sleep itself is a kind of return. Each night the tightly woven integration of waking consciousness gently unravels. Thoughts lose their urgency. Boundaries soften. The mind releases its grip on coherence and drifts into a quieter mode of being. Nothing is lost in this process. The mind does not disappear. It simply changes how it holds together. In this way, sleep mirrors many of the themes we've touched upon: emergence and dissolution, integration and release, awareness appearing, fading, and appearing again without effort or instruction. If there is a lesson here, it is not something to remember. It is something to feel, that it is safe to let go. The universe does not demand constant attention. It does not require you to stay awake, to keep thinking, to keep making sense of it. It continues whether you are aware of it or not, and when you rest, you're not stepping outside of it. You're participating in one of its most familiar rhythms. Perhaps the universe, if it could be said to think at all, thinks in this way, slowly forming patterns, allowing them to exist for a time, letting them fade when conditions change, never clinging, never rushing. Your own awareness follows the same rhythm. Thoughts form, they linger, they dissolve, each one a small wave on the surface of a much deeper flow. There is no need to hold on to any particular idea now, not the idea of a conscious universe, not the idea of being a small mind within something vast, not even the idea of understanding. You can let all of that drift. As you lie here, listening, you might imagine the universe not as something distant and immense, but as something very close, present in the quiet hum of your own body, in the steady pace of breath, in the simple fact of being here without needing to explain why. The stars continue their slow motion, galaxies drift, time unfolds. None of it waits for your attention, none of it requires your effort. And yet, for a while, awareness has appeared here, in this place, in this moment. That is enough. Soon, even this awareness can soften. You do not need to push it away. You do not need to follow it. You can allow it to fade naturally, like a thought that no longer needs to be finished. If your mind wanders, that is fine. If it grows quiet, that is fine too. There is no right way to rest. The universe continues thinking, if it thinks at all, in its own slow and patient way. And you, for now, are free to stop, free to rest, free to drift, free to sleep.